Staring at the text message, my stomach dropped. My parents were officially skipping my wedding to attend my younger sister's copycat ceremony on the exact same day. What my toxic family didn't realize was that we had just secretly secured an $8 million Tuscan estate for our real celebration. If you looked up the term golden child in the dictionary, you would find a picture of my younger sister, Chloe Kensington. Growing up in Greenwich, Connecticut, our family dynamic was established early and enforced with ironclad rigidity. Chloe was the fragile, beautiful star who needed constant protection and praise, and I was the capable, independent older sister who was expected to manage my own life, and often hers, without complaint. When Chloe failed a high school math class, my parents, Richard and Margaret, bought her a brand new BMW to cheer her up from the academic stress. When I graduated summa cum laude from NYU with a dual degree in computer science and business, they skipped the ceremony because Chloe had a really important audition for a local community theatre production. She didn't get the part. I got a text saying, "So proud of you, Clara, but your sister is devastated right now. We need to be here for her." I learned early on that if I wanted anything in life, I had to get it myself. And I did. By the time I was 28, I had developed a logistics software platform that I quietly sold to a major tech conglomerate. Nobody in my family knew the details of the buyout. To them, I was just Clara, who works on computers. They had no idea my net worth was comfortably sitting in the 8-figure range. I liked it that way. It kept the leeches at bay. The only person who knew the truth was Dominic. Dom was a British-American architect who I met at a gallery opening in Soho. He was brilliant, grounded, and came from quiet, generational wealth in London that he never felt the need to flaunt. We fell in love over our shared disdain for pretentious people and our mutual desire to build a life that was rich in experience, rather than showy displays of cash. When Dom proposed to me on a rainy Tuesday in our shared Manhattan apartment, surrounded by takeout boxes and our golden retriever, Barnaby, it was the happiest moment of my life. We decided on a beautiful, but relatively modest, autumn wedding in the Hudson Valley. We booked a charming historic barn, hired a great caterer, and set the date, October 12th. I called my parents that same night to share the news. "Oh, Clara, that's nice." "My mother," Margaret said, her tone instantly cooling. "October 12th? Are you sure that's a good time? The weather can be so unpredictable." "We love the autumn leaves, Mum," I replied, trying to keep the joy in my voice. "It's going to be perfect." "Well, let me just check on Chloe. She's been having a hard time with Preston lately. Hearing about your engagement might make her feel a bit insecure." Preston Harrington was Chloe's on-again, off-again boyfriend. He was a junior executive at his father's hedge fund, a guy whose personality was entirely based on his golf handicap and his trust fund. 2 weeks later, the bombshell dropped. I was at my office when my phone buzzed with a family group chat notification. It was a picture of Chloe's hand, sporting a diamond ring so large it looked like a Super Bowl trophy, resting on Preston's chest. The caption read, "We're getting married." I sighed, but I was genuinely happy for her. I replied immediately, "Congratulations, Chloe. So happy for you both." An hour later, my mother called me. She sounded breathless, practically vibrating with excitement. "Clara, isn't it wonderful? Our little Chloe is finally settling down." "It's great, Mum," I said. "And the best part," Margaret barreled on, ignoring me, "is that the Harrington family has already secured the Greenwich Country Club. It's going to be the event of the season." "Wow, that was fast." "When is it?" I asked, a cold knot suddenly forming in my stomach. There was a brief, highly calculated pause on the other end of the line. "Well, that's the thing. The club only had one Saturday left for the entire year before renovations start. So, Mum, when is the date?" "October 12th, she said, her voice dropping into that familiar, placating tone she used whenever she was about to demand a sacrifice from me. "Clara, I know it's your date too, but you have to understand. They simply couldn't pass up the venue. The room spun. My own sister had purposefully booked her wedding on the exact day I had announced 2 weeks prior. "Mom, you can't be serious," I said, my voice trembling. "I sent out save the dates 3 days ago. My deposits are paid. She stole my wedding date." "Oh, don't be so dramatic, Clara," Margaret sighed. "Nobody stole anything. It's just a date on a calendar. You and Dominic are having a casual barn thing anyway. It'll be so easy for you to just push it back a month or two. Chloe's wedding is going to be a massive production. She needs this." "No," I said firmly. It was the first time in years I had openly defied her. "I am not moving my date. She needs to move hers. Clara, be reasonable. If you both have it on the same day, how are your father and I supposed to attend?" "I guess you'll have to make a choice," I snapped, and hung up the phone. The fallout was immediate and toxic. Over the next week, my phone blew up with messages from aunts, uncles, and family friends. My parents had spun a masterful narrative. Clara was being a selfish, unyielding bridezilla who was trying to ruin her younger sister's dream wedding by refusing to compromise over a simple scheduling conflict. Dom watched me pace our living room, my phone buzzing relentlessly on the coffee table. He walked over, picked it up, and switched it to airplane mode. "You're making yourself sick over people who don't deserve your energy, darling," he said, pulling me into a hug. "I just don't understand it," I whispered into his shirt, fighting back tears. "Why does she have to take everything? Why do they let her?" "Because they are broken people who value optics over actual love," Dom said simply. "We don't have to play this game, Clara." But I wasn't ready to give up on my family just yet. I thought, foolishly, that if I could just sit them down and talk face to face, logic would prevail. I invited my parents to dinner at a quiet, upscale restaurant in Manhattan, hoping the neutral ground would help. They arrived 20 minutes late, complaining about the traffic from Connecticut. As soon as our drinks arrived, my father, Richard, cleared his throat. He was a man who viewed his family as an extension of his own personal brand. "Clara, I'm glad we're doing this. This whole feud is ridiculous. It's embarrassing to the family." "I agree," I said, sitting up straight. "Which is why I'm hoping you've spoken to Chloe about changing her date." Margaret slammed her cocktail glass down. "We have done no such thing. Clara, you are being incredibly stubborn. Preston's parents are paying a fortune for this wedding. Do you know who is going to be on that guest list? Senators, CEOs. We cannot ask them to change their plans just because you want to get married in a dusty barn on the same day." "I announced my date first," I said, keeping my voice dangerously level. "I have out-of-town guests who have already booked flights." "Then reimburse them," Richard barked. "You do well enough for yourself. Just pay for their flight change fees. It's a small price to pay for family harmony." "Family harmony?" I laughed. A bitter, hollow sound. "You mean capitulating to Chloe's tantrums? You know she did this on purpose. She couldn't stand the fact that I was getting attention for 5 minutes." "That is enough," Margaret hissed, looking around to see if anyone was listening. She leaned in over the table, her eyes cold. "Let me make this perfectly clear, Clara. Chloe is marrying into a very prominent family. This wedding is the most important event of her life. If you do not change your date, your father and I will have no choice." "No choice but what?" I challenged. My father looked me dead in the eye. "If you force us to choose, we will be at the Greenwich Country Club on October 12th. We will not be at your wedding. And frankly, we expect you to cancel your event entirely and stand beside your sister as her maid of honor." It's what a good sister would do. The silence that followed was deafening. The ambient noise of the restaurant seemed to fade away. I looked at the two people who had brought me into this world, the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally, and realized they didn't even see me. I was just a prop in the Chloe Kensington show. I didn't cry. The sadness evaporated, replaced by a crystalline, icy clarity. "I see," I said softly. I reached into my purse, pulled out $100 bill, and placed it on the table to cover my untouched drink. Clara, what are you doing? Margaret asked, faltering slightly at my sudden calm. I'm giving you what you want, I said, standing up. You don't have to worry about a scheduling conflict anymore. Consider my invitation formally revoked. Enjoy the country club. Clara, don't be childish, my father called out as I turned away. If you walk out that door, we won't pay a single cent toward your wedding. I paused, looking back over my shoulder. Dad, you weren't paying a cent anyway. I walked out into the cool New York night air, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. When I got back to the apartment, Dom was sitting on the couch reading blueprints. He took one look at my face, put his papers down, and opened his arms. I collapsed into them and finally let the tears fall. I told him everything, the ultimatum, the threat, the absolute dismissal of my life. When I finished, Dom was silent for a long moment. His jaw was clenched tight. Then, he reached for his laptop. What are you doing? I sniffled. I'm cancelling the barn, Dom said calmly, his fingers flying across the keyboard. Panic flared in my chest. Dom! No! We can't let them win. We're still getting married on the 12th. Oh, we absolutely are getting married on the 12th. Dom smiled, a slow, wicked grin spreading across his face. It was a look I rarely saw on him, the look of a man who was about to go to war. But we are not doing it in a barn. Clara, love, how much is your liquid capital right now? I blinked, thrown off by the question. About 18 million in the primary investment account. Why? Because, Dom said, turning the laptop screen toward me. I have about 25. And I was looking at this property last month as a potential boutique hotel development, but I think it serves a much better purpose now. On the screen was a sprawling, ancient estate, surrounded by rolling green hills, cypress trees, and endless vineyards. The stone architecture was breathtaking, with a massive central courtyard, a private chapel, and luxury villas scattered across the grounds. This is Villa Solaria, Dom said softly. It's in Tuscany, right outside of Florence. It's completely private. Comes with a Michelin-starred private chef, a helipad, and enough rooms to comfortably house 80 of our closest friends for a week. I stared at the screen, my jaw dropping. Dom, this looks like it belongs to royalty. How much is it? $8 million, he said. To buy it outright. We close in 3 weeks. We fly our true friends out. All expenses paid. First-class flights, bespoke welcome baskets, wine tours, the works. I looked from the screen to Dom. Are you serious? We were going to spend 80 grand. Plans change, Dom said, kissing my forehead. Your parents think you're some struggling little tech worker who they can bully into submission. They think they are the apex of high society because they got a booking at a golf club in Connecticut. I say it's time we remind them that there are levels to this game. A spark ignited in my chest. The golden child wanted a spectacle? Fine. Let her have her country club chicken dinners. Buy it, I whispered. Dom hit a key on his laptop. Already emailed my broker. Now, we need the best wedding planner in Europe. And Clara? Yes? We are going to make sure absolutely every single mutual friend, extended family member, and high society contact they care about receives an invitation to Tuscany. The war was on. We didn't just plan a wedding. We orchestrated a masterpiece of social warfare. Dominic's connections in Europe were nothing short of legendary. Within 48 hours of securing Villa Solaria, he had retained Allegra Rossi, a Milan-based event architect who handled private galas for the Ferragamo family and various European aristocrats. When I told Allegra the timeline was less than 6 months and our budget was effectively limitless, she didn't blink. We will create a paradise, Clara. Allegra purred over our first Zoom call, her background a blur of fabric swatches and Renaissance art. When your guests leave, they will feel as though they have touched heaven. The first strike in our silent war was the invitations. I didn't want standard cardstock. I wanted a physical manifestation of what my family had underestimated. We commissioned custom invitations bound in soft, hand-tooled Florentine leather, embossed with gold leaf. They were placed inside polished mahogany boxes, nestled in velvet, alongside a bottle of 2015 Tignanello, a highly sought-after super Tuscan red wine. We didn't mail them. We had them hand-delivered by private couriers to 80 carefully selected individuals. The guest list was a surgical strike. We invited my genuinely supportive college friends and Dom's elite circle from London. But the real masterstroke was the crossover list. My parents had been bragging to their Greenwich Country Club circle about Chloe's wedding, banking on the presence of certain high society heavyweights to elevate their own status. I invited those exact same heavyweights. I invited James Harrington, Preston's uncle and the CEO of a multinational logistics firm, who had been a quiet mentor to me during my early startup days. I invited my Aunt Evelyn and Uncle Thomas, the only relatives who had ever seen through my mother's toxic favoritism. I even invited Olivia Harrington, Preston's younger sister, who despised Chloe and had been secretly texting me her congratulations. The RSVPs didn't just trickle in, they flooded back. It turns out, when faced with the choice between a predictable, stuffy country club dinner in Connecticut and an all-expenses-paid, week-long luxury vacation at an $8 million private estate in Tuscany, 2 weeks after the mahogany boxes were delivered, I was sitting in my Manhattan office when my cell phone rang. The caller ID flashed. Margaret. I let it ring 3 times, took a deep breath, and answered. Hello, Mother. What did you do? She hissed. The sheer venom in her voice was palpable, stripping away any pretense of maternal affection. What in the hell did you do, Clara? I'm afraid you'll have to be more specific, I replied, leaning back in my leather chair. The Reeds, the Van der Poels, James Harrington. They just called your father to profusely apologize. But they are declining Chloe's invitation. They said they have a prior engagement in Italy. For your wedding! Margaret was practically hyperventilating. You are deliberately poaching our guests. I simply sent out invitations to people I care about. Mom, they are free adults. They made their own choices. You sent them $1,000 bottles of wine, she shrieked. You are bribing them. Where did you even get that kind of money? Are you in debt? Is Dominic bankrupting his family for this petty revenge? I smiled, a cold, hard expression that nobody was around to see. Dominic and I are perfectly fine, financially. I'm sorry to hear Chloe's guest list is thinning out. But as you said at dinner, it's just a date on a calendar, right? Cancel it, she commanded, her voice dropping to a dangerous, shaking register. Clara, I swear to God, if you do not cancel this Italian circus and tell those people you made a mistake, you are dead to this family. You will have no parents. You will have no sister. Mom, I said softly, staring out at the Manhattan skyline. You made that choice at the restaurant. I am just honoring it. Have a wonderful time at the country club. I hung up and immediately blocked her number, my father's number and Chloe's number. The bridge wasn't just burned. I had vaporized it from orbit. The fallout was spectacular. Through Olivia Harrington, I received daily updates on the absolute meltdown occurring in Connecticut. Chloe had thrown a screaming fit in the middle of a bridal boutique when she found out her prospective sister-in-law, Olivia, was a bridesmaid in my wedding. Preston was apparently drinking heavily to cope with the stress of his own family abandoning his wedding to attend the Tuscan event of the decade. My father, desperate to save face, had tried to spread a rumor that my wedding was a scam, a desperate ploy for attention. But that narrative collapsed entirely when Architectural Digest published a stunning online feature about Villa Solaria's recent acquisition by a prominent British-American architectural firm, featuring a quote from Dominic about our upcoming private nuptials on the grounds. We were bulletproof. And, October was fast approaching. On October 8th, 4 days before the wedding, the skies over Florence were a brilliant, piercing blue. Dominic and I stood on the sprawling stone terrace of Villa Solaria, watching a fleet of black Mercedes Sprinter vans wind their way up the cypress-lined driveway. The estate was even more magnificent in person than in the photographs. The air smelled of crushed rosemary, warm earth, and centuries of history. To our left, rolling vineyards stretched as far as the eye could see. To our right, the private chapel where we would say our vows stood bathed in golden sunlight. Our guests were arriving. We had chartered 2 first-class flights to bring our guests from New York and London directly to Florence. As the vans pulled into the central courtyard, staff members in immaculate white linen uniforms stepped forward with trays of iced Prosecco and warm, scented towels. Aunt Evelyn was the first to step out, her jaw dropping as she took in the towering stone arches and the cascading bougainvillea. "Clara," she breathed, pulling me into a fierce embrace. "My God, darling. When you said you changed venues, I didn't realize you bought a piece of the Renaissance." James Harrington stepped out next, looking relaxed in a tailored linen suit. He shook Dominic's hand warmly. "Brilliant move, Dom. My brother is furious." Of course. But frankly, Preston and Chloe's affair was shaping up to be a networking event, not a wedding. I'm glad to be here. The next 3 days were a masterclass in indulgence. Allegra Rossi had scheduled events that flowed seamlessly into one another, ensuring the guests were pampered but never overwhelmed. There was a morning truffle hunt with local guides and hounds, followed by a rustic feast in the woods. There were private wine-tasting seminars in the estate's subterranean cellars. There were spa treatments by the infinity pool overlooking the valley. Nobody mentioned Connecticut. Nobody mentioned the country club. It was as if my toxic family history had simply ceased to exist, washed away by the Tuscan sun. But drama, much like my mother, always finds a way to insert itself. On the evening of October 11th, the night before the wedding, we were hosting a lavish rehearsal dinner under a canopy of olive trees. Fairy lights twinkled above us, and a local string quartet played softly in the background. I was laughing at a joke James Harrington had just made when one of the estate's private security guards, a towering Italian man named Matteo, approached Dominic and whispered in his ear. Dominic's smile vanished. He nodded to Matteo, kissed my cheek, and said, "I'll be right back. My love, just a minor logistics issue at the front gate." I watched him walk away, a prickle of unease washing over me. 5 minutes passed, then 10. I excused myself from the table and made my way toward the massive iron gates at the entrance of the villa. As I approached, I heard a voice that made my blood run cold. "I have every right to be here. I am the father of the bride. Do you know who I am?" It was Richard. My father. I stepped out of the shadows of the courtyard. There he stood, on the other side of the wrought iron gate, flanked by a rented Fiat. He looked disheveled, his suit wrinkled from travel, his face flushed with anger and embarrassment. Dominic was standing on the inside of the gate, his hands casually in his pockets, projecting a terrifyingly calm aura. "Dad?" I said, my voice cutting through the warm night air. Richard's head snapped toward me. Relief flooded his face, quickly replaced by his usual demanding scowl. "Clara! Tell these goons to open the gate." My flight was delayed out of JFK, and the drive from Rome was a nightmare. I walked up to stand beside Dominic. I looked at my father, taking in his presence. "What are you doing here, Richard?" He flinched at the use of his first name. "What kind of question is that? It's your wedding tomorrow. I'm here to walk you down the aisle. Your daughter is getting married in Greenwich tomorrow," I stated flatly. "You made your choice perfectly clear at dinner. You said you would not attend my wedding, and you expected me to cancel it. So, why are you in Italy?" Richard looked around nervously, lowering his voice. "Clara, please. Let's talk inside. James Harrington is in there, isn't he?" And the Vander Pols, if I'm not seen here. My reputation back home. Chloe's wedding is a disaster, Clara. Preston's family is furious that so many VIPs bailed. It's embarrassing. I need to be seen here to save face. I stared at him. He didn't come because he loved me. He didn't fly across the Atlantic because he realized he had treated me terribly. He came because my guest list was better than Chloe's, and he needed the social capital. A heavy, absolute silence fell between us. For the first time in my 28 years, I didn't feel anger toward him. I just felt profound, crushing pity. You left Chloe on the eve of her wedding to try and crash mine for a photo op, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. You really are empty, aren't you? Clara, don't be disrespectful. Matteo, I said, turning to the head of security. This man is not on the guest list. Please escort him off the property. If he refuses to leave, call the local carabinieri. Clara, you can't do this, Richard yelled, grabbing the iron bars of the gate as Matteo stepped forward. I am your father. I paid for your college. I raised you. You raised a bank account, I said, turning my back on him. And you raised Chloe. You didn't raise me. I did that myself. I linked my arm through Dominic's. As we walked back toward the laughter, the music, and the people who actually valued us, the sound of my father shouting faded into the Tuscan night, drowned out by the beautiful life I had built without him. I woke up on the morning of October 12th to the sound of mourning doves and the gentle, rhythmic rustle of olive branches against my bedroom window. The air in Tuscany held a crisp, golden clarity that felt entirely divorced from the heavy, suffocating atmosphere of my childhood in Connecticut. I stepped out onto the private balcony of the master suite, wrapped in a plush silk robe, and looked out over the sprawling estate. Below me, Villa Solaria was a hive of quiet, orchestrated activity. Allegra Rossi's team was setting up the central courtyard for the reception, floating thousands of white orchids in the ancient stone fountains and arranging long, rustic wooden tables under a canopy of interwoven fairy lights. There was no screaming. There were no frantic phone calls or tearful tantrums about napkin rings or seating charts. There was only the serene, joyous hum of a celebration that was being built on a foundation of genuine love, rather than social climbing and familial obligation. I poured myself a shot of espresso from the silver carafe on the bedside table and let the profound peace wash over me. My father, Richard, was gone. Matteo, our head of security, had personally escorted him to a waiting taxi the night before, ensuring he was sent directly to a hotel in Florence with strict instructions not to return. The sheer audacity of his attempt to crash my rehearsal dinner just to secure a photo op for his country club cronies had finally severed the last, lingering thread of guilt I held regarding my family. I was free. I was entirely, unashamedly free. By 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the Mediterranean sun was bathing the private stone chapel in a warm, honeyed glow. I stood in the heavy oak vestibule, taking a deep breath. I was wearing a custom, unstructured silk gown crafted by an independent Florentine designer I had discovered months ago, a dress that felt like liquid pearl against my skin. I didn't have a bridal party of 10 stressed women in matching taffeta. I didn't have a father waiting to link his arm through mine and give me away like a piece of corporate property. I was walking myself down the aisle because I had built myself. The heavy oak doors swung open. The string quartet, seated near the altar, began to play a sweeping, classical arrangement of a song Dominic and I had heard on our first date. I stepped into the light. The chapel was filled with the people who had truly showed up for us in life. Aunt Evelyn was weeping openly in the front row. James Harrington gave me a warm, deeply respectful nod, and at the end of the aisle stood Dominic. He looked devastatingly handsome in a bespoke charcoal suit, but it was his eyes that caught me. They were bright, shining with unshed tears, completely locked onto mine as if I were the only living, breathing thing in the universe. The ceremony was incredibly intimate. We hadn't hired an officiant. Instead, Dominic's oldest friend from London, a brilliant poet named Thomas, led the proceedings. We wrote our own vows. When it was my turn, I looked at Dominic and spoke from the deepest part of my soul. For so long, I thought love was a transaction, I told him, my voice echoing softly off the ancient stone walls. I thought it was something I had to earn through obedience, or silence, or by shrinking myself down so others could feel big. But you showed me that real love doesn't require a compromise of the self. You gave me a sanctuary. You gave me a true family. And today, in front of the people who matter most, I promise to be your sanctuary in return. There wasn't a dry eye in the chapel. When Dominic kissed me, the applause that erupted was deafening, bouncing off the vaulted ceilings and spilling out into the Tuscan hills. The reception that followed was nothing short of a culinary and visual masterpiece. We dined on wild boar ragout, truffle risotto, and Florentine steak prepared by a Michelin-starred local chef, paired with wines that had been aging in the villa's cellars for decades. Laughter rang out over the clinking of crystal glasses. Halfway through the dinner, James Harrington stood up and tapped his knife against his wineglass. The courtyard quieted down as Preston's uncle, a man my parents had so desperately wanted to impress, raised his glass to us. "To Clara and Dominic," James said, his voice carrying effortlessly in the cool night air. "In my line of work, we talk a lot about investments. People invest in properties, in stocks, in ventures, but the greatest, most perilous investment a person can make is in their own happiness. It takes immense courage to walk away from the expected path, to draw a line in the sand, and to say, 'I deserve better.' Clara, you are one of the strongest, most brilliant women I know. You and Dom have built a kingdom here tonight, not of stone, but of authenticity. May your lives together be as rich, honest, and beautiful as this evening." We all raised our glasses, the amber liquid catching the fairy lights. It was a perfect moment. And then, precisely 10 minutes after the cake was cut, the Karma of Connecticut finally arrived in Italy. I was standing near the edge of the courtyard, holding Dom's hand and looking out at the vineyards, when Olivia Harrington Preston's younger sister approached us. Her face was pale, her eyes wide, and she was clutching her cell phone so tightly her knuckles were white. "Clara," Olivia breathed, looking entirely shell-shocked. I think you need to see this." She held up her phone. It was open to a massive family group chat. "What is it?" Dominic asked, his brow furrowing as he moved closer to look. "The Greenwich wedding," Olivia swallowed hard. It exploded. I took the phone from her trembling hands and began to read. The messages were a chaotic, frantic string of all-caps texts, photos, and voice notes from Preston, his mother, and various other Harrington relatives. It took me a moment to piece together the absolute catastrophe that had unfolded across the Atlantic. When Richard had failed to return to Connecticut for the morning of the wedding, my mother, terrified of losing face in front of the elite Harrington family, she concocted a massive, spectacular lie. She told Preston's parents that Richard had suffered a sudden, severe heart attack and was currently in the ICU at a hospital in New York. She played the grieving, stressed matriarch perfectly, using the fabricated medical emergency to garner sympathy and excuse the glaring absence of half their promised VIP guest list. It was a brilliant, manipulative move. And it would have worked if it weren't for social media. James Harrington, completely unaware of the lie being spun in Connecticut, had uploaded a beautifully lit, professional photograph from our Tuscan rehearsal dinner to his private Instagram account the night before. Because his accounts were linked, the photo automatically synced to his Facebook page, which Preston's mother followed. In the foreground of the photo, James was holding a glass of wine and smiling. In the background, just past the wrought iron gates, Richard was clearly visible, red-faced and wearing a tailored suit, aggressively arguing with Matteo, our security guard. Preston's mother had seen the photo 2 hours before the ceremony. She realized instantly that not only was Richard perfectly healthy, but he had abandoned his own daughter's wedding to try and crash mine in Italy. The confrontation had occurred in the bridal suite of the country club. According to the frantic texts, Preston's mother had marched in and demanded the truth from Margaret. When confronted with the photographic evidence, Margaret had completely broken down. Chloe, realizing her perfect day was crumbling, had thrown a monumental, violent tantrum. She had screamed at Preston's mother, blaming the Harringtons for not being important enough to keep the guests in Connecticut, and in a fit of absolute rage, she had thrown a crystal champagne flute at the wall, showering the room in glass. That was the breaking point. Preston, who had been dealing with Chloe's escalating toxicity for years, finally saw the unmasked reality of the family he was marrying into. He realized that the entire event, and perhaps their entire relationship, was nothing but a hollow pursuit of status. He had walked out. 1 hour before the ceremony was scheduled to begin, Preston Harrington had called off the wedding, leaving Chloe in her dress, Margaret in tears, and a ballroom full of confused, whispering guests. I stared at the screen, the weight of the texts sinking in. The absolute, unmitigated destruction of the Kensington family facade. "My God," Dominic whispered, having read over my shoulder. He looked at me, his expression a mix of shock and fierce protectiveness. "Clara, are you all right?" I handed the phone back to Olivia. I looked up at the Tuscan stars, feeling the cool night breeze against my face. I waited for the sadness to hit me. I waited for the pity, or the guilt, or the urge to call my mother and fix the mess. But nothing came. The emotional well was completely dry. "I'm fine," I said, a slow, genuine smile spreading across my face. I looked at my husband, the man who had helped me build an empire of love, and then out at the courtyard filled with people laughing, dancing, and celebrating our future. In fact, I have never been better. Let's go dance. The fallout in the months that followed was absolute. Margaret and Richard became social pariahs in their Greenwich circles. The country club elite do not forgive public humiliation and blatant lies. Chloe, utterly shattered by the loss of her wealthy fiancé and her ruined reputation, moved out of state to lay low. We never spoke again. They had made their bed, and now they had to sleep in the ashes of it. As for me, I lived happily ever after, not in a fairy tale, but in a reality I built with my own 2 hands, surrounded by the family I chose.